Stand by for this interview. We're 2 minutes away, and I'm going to go to Marcus Vetter and Martin Armstrong. Stand by for this interview. Okay, everyone get ready to hear Martin Armstrong, legendary forecaster, and his director, Marcus Vetter. Let me just get set up for this call and we'll get underway. Okay. Here we go. Hello, Marcus.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Fine.
You want to go to your... I'm also going to have to give Martin a call here. So
Yep.
Let me get Martin. In fact, there we go. There we go. Hi, Martin. Can you hear me clearly? Marcus, can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
All right, I'm waiting for Marty to pick up the call. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi, Marty. How are you?
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me today. I'd like to start off directing this question to you, Marcus. Whose idea was it to put this movie together, The Forecaster? Was this something that Marty wanted to do to get his story out? Or did you come to him because you knew it would be a fascinating life story to tell? I have to say that I followed Marty's work in the 90s. Marty, do you remember Buzz Schwartz and George Gamble at K-Money Radio?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I used to be interviewed on that station, and we all paid a great deal of attention to your Turning Point work. You're kind of an inspiration to me. You and Paul Tudor Jones taught me that all the big money is made at the turns. But I'm interested in what is the mission and the purpose of this film, The Forecaster, Marcus?
Okay. You have to know that in '99, just before Marty was arrested, I tried to interview him because I made a film about the high-tech stock market in Germany. Because I was also sensing that it was going much too way up. And then I wanted to talk to someone who knew about game theory. And a lot of people were advising me, you have to talk to Martin Armstrong. And that's what I tried, but that was exactly the moment when he was arrested. So I never could talk to him. And in 2002, there was another interesting thing. 2002, 1.5 years later, I just by coincidence I saw his website again, and it was still up, but nobody was doing something with it. And I saw there that he predicted as well the 2000 downturn in March. So then in 2006 or 7, I think, I began reading his blogs, which he was writing from prison. And then I wanted to interview him again, but I couldn't get into the prison. So I was actually following him for a long time, and when he got out of prison, that was the moment when actually his lawyer called me, Tom Schaublom, and asked me, listen, you were following Marty for that such a long time, and now he's out of prison. Do you want to talk to him? He's asking, where's this German who is chasing me all the time? So that's how we.
So we're talking about over a decade long, where you were trying to press the flesh and meet the legend, Marty Armstrong, and so that's a great lesson in persistence. And this is how you guys decided to tell the story, because I've never heard the story, Marty. When this happened to you, and I heard about it in the media, to me it struck me as strange with someone with your skill set that calls the collapse of Russia, who said when the Nikkei was peaking that we're looking at the high of our lifetime in the Nikkei. It's the people that don't know how to do this and pull equity out of the market that resort to Ponzi schemes. So I never knew what the real reason was. And your work is amazing to me. But let me tell you, what I find amazing is how you were able to persevere and what you relied on for strength when you were going through your tribulation. How did you get through it, Marty?
Well, actually, when my first lawyer who they threw out, his name was Richard Altman. He was actually a personal friend. And when New York started, he said, oh my God, it's New York. I said, what's the difference? And he said, you don't understand, they practice law differently there. And I didn't understand at the time because I thought the law was the law. And then at my first bail hearing, it became obvious. I didn't even understand what the complaint was supposed to be. We published footnote 5 saying that this whole idea of a Ponzi scheme, you pay somebody more money than they're supposed to, so then it entices them back. And we were, first of all, we weren't managing money. We were buying portfolios, and we were swapping out yen. That was it. We weren't actually managing their money. So it just became quite obvious they didn't understand what they were talking about, because they were saying that I was only supposed to pay them 4%. I paid people 20%. That was just currency. And it was just really crazy. So,
well, isn't it your contention, Marty, that after they saw some of your forecasts, including nations rising and falling, that the government wanted your code and your model, and because you spent your whole life developing it, from the time you were a coin collector to the time you took your dad's trade of Fidelity that went down 75%, and you said, is this how conservative investors make money? That you weren't willing to give up your life's work to the government, and you also felt that they didn't want it for the right purposes. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, they called the office, and actually I think it was our employee Jim Smith who took the call. And they basically said, look, we're going to pull the curtain back here, and this is the CIA, and we want, talk to you about this model. This was right after the forecast on Russia collapsed. So, I spoke to them. I said, look, we'll run any study you want here, no problem. And the attitude was pretty kind of, blunt and nasty. They said, no, we have to own it. I just said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to come down to Washington to build something for you people that took me 17 years to do. And so it just kind of became more of a confrontation after that rather than a cooperative effort.
Okay. All right. And how did you have the conviction and strength to, every time you went through that cycle of being held for 18 months, where you still decided to not cooperate by giving up your model, knowing that you would face another 18 months?
Well, when I was first going to court, the judge was constantly making these jokes again about this guy, Stephen Fisher, in an SEC case that had been before him. And like, well, I took his lawyers away. I was never overruled, stuff like that.
Right.
And then he would just laugh. And I turned to my lawyer. I said, who is this guy, Stephen Fisher, he's always talking about? And he says, oh, you don't want to know. And I said, no, I want to know. Who's he joking about? And Stephen Fisher was an SEC case before him. He took all his lawyers away, and the guy ended up committing suicide.
Okay.
And I couldn't believe the callousness that these people had. And here you have a federal judge joking of the fact that he made somebody commit suicide. So at that point, it was like, okay, now I know what I'm really up against. And they were just, you just look at these people, and it's like there's some sort of zombie. It's just absolute a feeling of cold death that comes out of their eyes.
Okay, well, I was given some advice when I was a younger guy, and it was Dale, make money in a closet, which is advice that neither you or I heeded. Okay, so with that in mind, and you look back now, with time being our most precious currency, more precious than gold, more precious than anything, would you have done things differently than you did based upon sticking to your guns?
No, I wouldn't. People ask me, how come you're not bitter or something like that? I view it as a learning experience. On one hand, I wouldn't really fully understand the inner workings of government as well as I do today if I hadn't gone through it. You have to actually experience something. It's like a guy trying to write a book about what's it feel like to give birth.
Right. Yeah.
You just have to really be in it to understand what it's about.
Yeah, you can't learn experience. It only happens through time and living through things. I'd like to ask you, it's interesting, Marcus talks about that you continued your writings while incarcerated. I make a joke here on FX Street that being in the markets is like being in the mafia or Hotel California. You could check out, but you can never leave. So how are you getting market data under those circumstances? And was your work part of the way that you were able to cope with that type of isolation? And what did it feel like to know the crash in '07 was going to happen and not be able to do anything about it?
Well, the crash, I didn't really, think too much about it. I just knew it was going to happen. That was just the way it was. What was the shock was that I get Armstrong's Revenge and stuff like that. And I started getting really swamped with all these letters from people saying, come out, talk, And so actually one of my former clients was Conrad Black, who was the Canadian, mogul up there in newspapers.
Right. And
they had thrown him in prison, and he was in Florida. And he started writing for his newspapers, and I thought, that's a good idea. So I went to him, I said, well, I want to work. I want to start writing. And they said, okay, fine. They couldn't stop me from that because it's really a First Amendment issue. They just said, well, fine, but you can't make any money. So I said, that's all right. I don't care. I'll do it for free, which I don't think they expected.
Okay.
And then I was getting letters which, kind of made me laugh. People saying, gee, I'm really sorry what they did for you, but if they didn't do this, we wouldn't get this.
Interesting. Okay.
So I said, yeah, okay, fine. I found that humorous in one way. So I would say the biggest disappointment I had was not so much the corruption of the government, but the corruption of the press. Gretchen Morgenson had put me on the front page of the New York Times, and all of a sudden she was pulled off, not allowed to write about me again. Bloomberg has erased me from all their terminals. In the film, there's a little clip that Marcus found, I think, on the Wayback Machine or something. And so he had gone to Bloomberg. He had heard that I was, discussed on TV, etc. And they said, oh, no, we don't have anything on him. And so he had to find it through a separate source, and then went back to them and says, well, I have something, can I use it? So they've done everything. When they publish a list of frauds or whatever, I'm never in it. I've been erased from computers. It's almost as if they're just trying to pretend nothing ever happened.
Okay. So
Actually,
you had to live through this, and you're definitely a personification of you don't lose till you quit. And
Really, I mean, if I had given up anything to them, then what do I have, or what reason would they have to release me? I mean, I became very familiar with a lot of cases that they were pulling off. There was one guy, I forgot what his name was, but he was arrested and prosecuted on dealing with Libya. And he had said that he was working undercover for the CIA. They denied it. And his daughter went off to become a lawyer and to try and defend her father, and they kept him in the hole for I think it was like 10 years. When they do that, it's to keep you silent. So he had no communications unless somebody physically went there to view him. And then she kept filing under the Freedom of Information Act, and finally got a piece of document that showed that he did work for the CIA, and then suddenly they had to release him. So I just realized you can't give in to these people. If you do, you're never getting out. They will kill you. There's no question about it.
so why stay in the U.S., Marty? After what you went through, don't you have any trepidation or post-traumatic stress after the life experience that you had? Being out there again, sharing your model with the public and trying to educate governments how to avoid what you see as a sovereign debt crisis?
Not really. I mean, I'm not a great proponent of our legal system here. I think it's terrible. But you also have to realize that the people that I had the altercation with are those in New York City.
Okay.
At the same time, when I go down to Washington, D.C., and I've gone into Capitol Hill, I'm introduced as this is the guy that with the model they've been trying to suppress. So it's actually when I was writing from prison and they threw me in the hole, you'll see some of those on the web, I was actually answering questions for the House Banking Committee at that time. And I told them, I said, you do know where I am. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll try and, whatever you want. We'll try and get you out of there early. I said, no, I don't want any pardons or anything like that. So I was actually answering questions for Congress against the banks. And when they threw me in the hole, the reason they took me out of the hole quickly is because there was a letter then sent to them from Congress demanding an investigation who threw me in the hole. So you end up with different aspects of government fighting with each other.
Depends who's in power, Marty, but from what I saw in the forecaster, you say government doesn't control banks, banks control the government. So that brings us to the question where you talk about the sovereign debt issue can be resolved in one of three ways, either to inflate, debase the currency, default, or restructure. So what are the banks going to want to do, Marty?
Well, the banks, that is why we're in this deflationary mode. What is deflation versus hyperinflation? The deflation is you're trying to support the bondholders. Inflation, you don't care about them and you just print. So that's why I've been against kind of like the hyperinflationist of the gold bug type idea. I said they're not going to do that. They're not in a position where they have to just print. They have actual physical debts that they are trying to uphold, and that's deflation. So it's raise taxes, do this, grab as much money from them as you can because you got to pay us, and that's the function that we're in at this point, and it's a very serious one.
Yes, we've had a pretty nice move in yields from the 1.6 on the 10-year to almost 2.5, and the bonds went from a negative interest rate. Marcus brought up when I chatted with him this morning a lot of concerns about bonds. So this sovereign debt crisis is going to be a rolling one. It's happening in Europe, possibly Japan. They're talking about transferring the JGBs from the pension system to the government to cushion the pension system. And perhaps it rolls over here to the U.S. eventually too, since we're the biggest debtor nation on the planet.
Well, we have a large debt, true, but we also have the largest economy. The actual country that has the largest debt per capita is Britain, not the United States. The United States is well down on the list. And because we actually have an economy that is viable. I mean, Obama keeps raising taxes and to try and take us down the same path as Europe. But, unfortunately, that will eventually prevail. So, but we're just in this real serious debt crisis. And, I mean, you just had Larry Summers coming out, saying that the problem here is that people save too much money and they're not spending it. So this is why they want to do with the negative interest rates, etc. But I've warned that government's not in control. The central banks are not in control of everything, as a lot of propaganda plays it. They can control short-term rates only.
Correct.
I mean, that's why QE 1 through 3 even happened, because they cannot control the long side. They engaged in that to try to influence it. So what we've just seen is, what I've been warning about is that the peak in the long-term side should have been this May turning point. But the short end, where very short-term paper is actually in shortage. I mean, they're selling out the long-term bonds and they're moving paper, 90-day paper at best.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old TED spread days, right, Marty? A flight to quality trade.
So we're going to probably see that going into September. We'll see one last final spike to real negative rates on the short term, because the governments have been issuing more on the long-term side. And there's actually a shortage of short-term paper, but we're all in the same boat. I mean, every government is in turmoil. When I've met with these people, it's always the same thing. I said, "Would you run your own business or life this way?" They said, "Well, of course not. But we're government. We're different." They just think that they can do this forever. There's no rational explanation. They just say, "Well, we're the government." So
Okay,
it's hard to argue with a thinking process like that.
Okay, we also have the advantage of being the reserve currency. The IMF every 10 years reviews it. Do you see any threat from the yuan as being included in an SDR at the IMF, and possibly some capital flows changing if, I know the IMF just came out and said the yuan is no longer an undervalued currency. They've been lobbying to be part of this SDR package for a while. You think it'll happen?
Well, sure. I mean, China will surpass the U.S. economy, but that's a different criteria for reserve currency. A reserve currency is a place where you can actually park money. And yes, the U.S. has the largest debt, but it's also the only place you can park. All right? And I'm talking about big size.
Okay.
This is why the euro has failed. And they actually came to us back, in '97 to our conference and everything, and I told them, the euro would fail unless you consolidate the debts, and they understood that, and that was going to be phase 2. They said that they didn't think they could get the European population to vote for it. So what they would do is they just wanted to get the currency in first, and then they would go with the debt second. But then the problem is those people leave, and then new people come in, and they never hear of phase 2. So Europe is kind of a disaster in the sense that there is no single bond that represents Europe, and therefore, as long as you don't, have that, then you have to pick and choose. So the bonds went, really, really were the bet against the euro. And that's what people don't realize, is that when I, deal with a lot of Europeans, they were all buying the bonds assuming that the euro would crack and then they would end up with Deutschmarks. I told them I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think Germany's actually going to leave. So now you have Germany and France calling for a federalized taxation. Once they did that, I think really the whole thing with the bunds, and I think it's over with now, and people are going to have to look much more seriously at everything. So it still leaves the dollar in this reserve currency position, but I don't think that will last much longer, probably another couple years. And then the dollar will be pushed up to excessive highs, as it was in going into, following 1931. And then we're going to probably end up with some new type of reserve currency after the fact. But you got to create the damage first.
Crisis first, and then a realignment and possibly a change in the fractional banking system.
Yeah, it's not even the fractional banking system. I know a lot of people have been blaming that, but honestly, if you look at it, if that was the trouble, there wouldn't be excess reserves at the Federal Reserve. You have, $2.5 trillion sitting there, which is showing they're not lending.
Right.
And my argument with the banks is that this is not banking as usual. This is transactional banking. And that's how they sold the repeal of Glass-Steagall. They said, listen, if I lend money to you and then I sell it to somebody else, I don't have your risk, so therefore the banking system will be stronger. This is how they sold it to Congress.
Right.
They thought, oh, okay, fine, that will make the banks even stronger. But what has happened is now I'll lend you money, I don't really care if you're going to pay or not, because I just sold it to Marcus.
Right.
So
even the
it's
mortgage
transactional
holder.
banking.
Right.
Fractional banking is I would lend to you and I would keep it on my books. Exactly. You're my risk, so I'm going to make sure you're okay. But transactional banking, I've off-sold it to somebody else. I mean, how many people's mortgages are actually paid to the bank that gave it to them?
That's correct, and a great point. I'd like to ask you about this date that you have coming up in October that I noticed on the movie. I don't want to give everything away. We've had some questions from the public, knowing that you were coming in here. People are interested in if you think this is going to be some type of price high or we're going to go down into the event. I'm sure you've witnessed cycles inverting sometimes. What's your best guess? Is that European equities, U.S. equities are showing strength into this number or declining into this turning point date in October?
Well, hopefully they'll back off into it.
Okay.
This is not a turning point. Each one of these big waves is, it's something different. The timing remains the same, but the flavor changes.
The magnitude?
So one time it's going to be gold or commodities. Next one will be stocks. Then there was the IT one,
right.
Emerging markets. They move with each one of these types. So the 07 was real estate. This one should be government. So the mere fact you have interest rates going negative, etc., this should be the peak in government itself, not per se the stock market crash. The difference with this type of a move is that we may get a false move down with the stock market, but then people are going to realize, okay, fine, if government's in trouble, where do you go? What are you going to do with your money? The only place to go is the private sector. That's it. So I think you're going to see the stock market actually rally quite sharply for probably the high we're looking at is most likely in 2017.
Okay. Interesting, and that clarifies things. So this is more of a government bond bubble than a stock bubble. Yeah,
I mean, retail participation in stocks is at near historic lows. And, if you look at any peak in no matter what market you're talking about, gold 1980 or or the Dow 1929, the Nikkei. You always see these dramatic doubling effects, and they're very towards the end, and we call them a phase transition. You don't see that in equities. The Dow, yeah, it makes new highs, backs off, but it's been crawling. It's not like an exhaustive move to the upside.
It's not parabolic anymore.
Yeah, so it's not something that is warning, even from a technical pattern, that, hey, this is way overdone.
Okay.
It's mostly foreign capital that's been coming in and out. And when I got called in by the Brady Commission in '87, I didn't want to go, but they started lobbying all my friends because we had said there would be a crash, so they kind of needed us, there. And I would say my biggest accomplishment then was to say, look, this is not the private sector. This was G5. You guys stand up, say you're going to lower the value of the dollar by 40%, and you don't expect foreigners to sell. They just don't understand currency. And if you look at it, the '87 crash forced all the money out of the U.S., and where to go? The Japanese took it back, and then what you get is the bubble there in 2 years.
Right.
So it's a capital flow thing. And,
yeah, so really the currency is a fulcrum, is a linchpin to all of this, isn't it? And if you're positive on the dollar, and the dollar continuing to appreciate against most currencies, that would be a cushion for U.S. dollar-denominated assets, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. That's why the Dow doesn't go down dramatically. And when you look at this stuff, what made Japan peak in '89? I can tell you because I was there, and in the early '80s,
wasn't it buying Rockefeller Center?
Well, that was a symbol of the end of U.S. investment. But what happened in the early '80s, I was there in Europe. And in Geneva, we were all dealing with the OPEC money. Then as I get called into Japan more, at first I was reluctant. I said, gee, I don't know anybody there. And when I went there, all of a sudden, all the brokers I knew who were dealing with OPEC all followed over there. So I could see the capital flows actually took talent with it as well. So it was all foreigners buying. And why? Because the Nikkei was going up, but so was the yen.
Yes.
So if you were a foreigner buying Japan, you made a lot more money than the Japanese did. And as soon as the yen, basically, the peak came about, basically, what'd you do? You got out. They went out, and then where'd the capital go? Went to Southeast Asia. Then that peaks in 4 years. And as that starts to decline, then you get the currency, crisis over there because all the money's leaving. So we're in that
just like
phase,
sector rotation, we have country rotation.
It's you have sector rotation within each economy.
Okay.
And then you have international economies in rotation. Okay. So it's more of a complex nature, but we have to realize that if Europe's in trouble and Japan's in trouble, capital will come here. If it comes here and bonds are already peaked and you got interest rates at negative, it's got to go someplace. And I would say it's going to go back into tangible asset area, which is going to be equities and even some commodities.
Okay, interesting. I also noticed during the movie, and I want to announce that FX Street has a discount code to view the forecaster, that you were talking about a war cycle that turned up in 2014 and your experience with Russia and having called the collapse of Russia and a bond deal you avoided because of your work, and actually Yeltsin got pushed out and an unknown guy named Putin came in. And now we're looking at Putin during these war cycles that turned up in 2014. What are you more concerned about? What's happening there in the Ukraine, or the ratcheting up of tensions in between the Chinese and the U.S. and South China Seas?
It's everywhere. Unfortunately, this cycle, as a lot of people have been stunned by it when this thing actually has been working. It's not a personal opinion. We've just simply taken a computer and correlated everything.
With pi, right? Pi being the foundation for it?
Well, pi is a perfect cycle, yes. Yeah. But when you correlate the world, you get the answers. And so it's not my opinion that we're talking about here. It's very interesting, but the way I explain it is that we don't go to war when everybody's fat and happy. Right. You turn the economy down, then the people will get mad initially at government. And so government needs an external enemy. Right. U.S., it's terrorists. Putin, we handed Putin the excuse that has made him a hero. U.S. deliberately has gone off and tried to do sanctions. And I can tell you what they're doing now is that there's another little pipeline that he's trying to route through Turkey, through Greece, and up through Macedonia. So now they're trying to go after Macedonia to block that pipeline. It's all economics, and they're trying to isolate Russia, which I think is really seriously wrong. But it's creating tensions everywhere. And, China and Russia has made, your enemy is right. Is my friend. Right. That's it. So I think the U.S. is made a serious blunder on all this stuff. It's hurt Europe tremendously because who gets the brunt of the sanctions? It was all the European farmers, not American. So Russians stopped buying Mercedes and stuff like this. I mean, it's really crazy. I mean, I was just there in Venice, and in St. Mark's Square, they have those, the orchestras that play, mm-hmm. And so we stopped there for dinner and listening, and they were playing all Russian songs. I said to the guy, "There's no Russians here anymore." And I said, "Oh well, we could play New York, New York." I said, "And how about Italian songs?"
Interesting.
But so the world has changed. I mean, the Russian tourists have pulled back. I saw far more Chinese in Venice than I did anybody else. I counted the tourist groups that went by, and I passed 10 in a row that were all Chinese.
Okay, I have a question from someone at FX Street, and they're asking about Socrates is going to be released this month. Is it going to be in English only, and or will it also be in German? Perhaps Marcus is going to take care of the translation on that. Any more info on the Socrates Trader service?
Not yet. We're actually trying to finish this up this week. But as far as we do have a site up in Russian, and we have a site up in Chinese. And as far as it looks like we're at least at the early stages, you'll be able to type in and translate, etc. Shouldn't be a problem. When we bring in the voice, yes, it's actually will recognize many different languages.
And I'd like to wrap it with this. You said that the issue may not be that it's going to be a difficult trade as this rolling sovereign debt crisis continues, but the ability to make a trade. You think they're going to shut the game down, Marty?
Well, you have, unfortunately, politicians in Europe that want to actually outlaw short selling. Even during the 2007 crisis, it was okay to short, Bear Stearns. It was okay to short Lehman. As soon as they started to short Goldman Sachs, they stopped all short selling against the financials. So we have to realize that we're up against the governments that are losing power, and as they lose power, this is part of the cycle. They become much, much more aggressive.
Bail-ins, like Cyprus?
That's now just about passed in the laws secretly for just about every country.
Right.
So they're not going to bail out like they did before. They realize they're not going to write a check again for nearly $1 trillion.
Not after how they treated Jamie Dimon for taking that over. Why would they?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I have, some of the New York banks that are not in the trading mode. They come to us, and I understand how it happens. And I got a call that the Fed was going around visiting all of them and telling them that they felt that their models were incorrect, and that there wouldn't be necessarily the flight to quality to 30-year paper anymore, or 10-year paper. And so I got a call from one of the banks in New York, and they said they thought the Fed was looking at our model because they're telling in private meetings exactly what we've been saying. So I think things are changing, and they know they have a problem. They just won't admit it publicly yet.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on to me, hearing you talk after all these years. In my way is maybe how you felt the first time you felt rain fall on your face in 7 years, Marty. And Marcus, I want to congratulate you for your persistence in pursuing Marty, and it's so great to have you back in the public domain again, Marty. Your work is awesome, and I was glad to be able to speak to you personally when you were just kind of an idol for me when I was young. Now I'm old. And appreciate both of your times. Wish you much success with the movie The Forecaster and all of your efforts, and hope to be able to do this again down the line as things continue to evolve in the sovereign debt crisis.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I think if we can enlighten everybody, that would be really good.
Okay, my friends, good hunting to both of you, and thanks again for joining us, edifying our community with your telescope today, Marty.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Dale.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.